which is where how the cards were introduced. You know, the four-suit deck was originally introduced in Spain and in Sicily by Islamic peoples, and it was called the Mamluk deck. And the suits were coins and cups, scimitars, and polo sticks. And they had 10 tips and 3 royal cards. And so the first Spanish and Italian decks imitated that, and so they made that the suit symbols. And of course, the Tarot took those 4-suit decks and then added the trumps to it, and that happened in the 1400s. So the deck was introduced in the 1300s, but by the 1400s they added trump cards to it. You know, but not every, but they're still using 4-suit decks too.
This is Brave New History. Thank you for watching. We're here with Robert M. Place. Thank you so much for joining us. So Robert M. Place is a prominent Tarot artist and author, written a good amount of books on the Tarot, and yeah, could you give us maybe a little bit of background and maybe how you came into it? And
I lost count. I'm not sure how you count the decks anymore. You know, because like I did the alchemical tarot, but then I keep doing variations of it, and so it's each. I mean, they seem like they're totally new decks, but then I did art editions where I printed them myself, and then there's ones that there's ones I did with publishing companies. Like the alchemical tarot originally came out with Thorson's in London, which is a branch of HarperCollins, and then with HarperCollins in San Francisco I did the Angels Tarot, and then I did what came next? I guess it was the Tarot of the Saints with Llewellyn, and then I did the Buddha Tarot with Llewellyn, and then I did the Vampire Tarot with St. Martin's Press. But then I just started making my own. I started my own publishing company. So since then I published my own decks and did updates and variations on various decks and keep coming up with new decks. And then also I do decks where I basically make giclée prints and hand cut them, and like I made a copy of the or recreate, or I guess you'd say it's a recreation of the oldest woodcut deck from Ferrara in Italy. That I lecture regularly at the Metropolitan Museum on their collection, and they have some of the oldest woodcut cards in the world there. And so they have this deck that's fragmented because it only exists as uncut sheets. It was never cut out and used, and the sheets exist because basically they were rejected and they recycled them for the paper inside of book covers. Like when they would put paper together, it's called pasteboard, and then they put leather over it for the book cover. So when the book covers were restored in the library in Budapest, they said, "Oh wow, look, there's these tarot cards from the 1400s. Some of the oldest in the world that are woodcuts." Because we have some hand painted ones that, a lot of them are in the J.P. Morgan Library in New York. But so what happened is 3 sheets of these came to the Met, which is sort of the start of their tarot collection. And then so I go there and lecture on the tarot collection, and then I recreated the whole Ferrara deck, and it's actually in the Metropolitan Museum. So, but I never did a mass printing of it, and I have other decks like that too. So I made over 20 decks, and I can't even keep track of them.
Yeah, and then there's the Gnostic Saints one.
Yeah, that was the one that I did with Llewellyn first.
Yeah.
It's probably my least successful deck, and I won an award for it.
Yeah, you wonder, because everybody, Gnosticism, at least on my channel, if you put Gnostic in front of it, it's going to be successful. But maybe with the public generally, maybe not so much.
Well, it's weird because the book that came with it, I called it a Gnostic Book of Saints, right? And and at the time, this came out around 2000, and people were complaining, but like they didn't know what Gnosticism was. So I think things have changed since then.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of scholars now are going to say we really don't know what Gnosticism is, right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
it's such an
first,
expansive term.
there weren't any Gnostics. No one in the ancient world called themselves a Gnostic.
Yeah.
So there were no Gnostics. There were people that were searching for gnosis, and then later historians said, "Oh, they're Gnostics because they were searching for gnosis," but they just were looking for gnosis. It's basically like if you called Buddhist enlightenists or something.
That's a good way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how did you come into Tarot? Like, what attracted you to it, and
Well,
what's your philosophy?
it
Yeah.
just picked me. I didn't see. I didn't really. I mean, when I was in college, I mean, I had been an artist my whole life. So I was in college in Montclair, New Jersey, studying art, and my girlfriend was doing the tarot cards at the time. She used the Wade Smith deck, and I was fascinated by it. But then I started doing some research in the library and found these pictures of Tarot of Marseille and older decks, and I got interested in because I was always interested in esoteric subjects as an artist. So the um, I actually started creating a deck. I got little pieces of cardboard and I painted copies of the Marseille cards, and I made maybe 4 cards, and I said, "Wow, this is a lot of work." Just forget it. It was like I didn't really want to keep doing it. So I wasn't really into the tarot until like in the 1980s. I was living in New Jersey, and I had a dream where I was in the middle of another dream, and in the dream I was walking through a building, and I was in the living room, and there was a phone table on the side. Like when people used to have tables just for their phones instead of putting them in their pockets and stuff. And it was like one of those phones where it had a dial and a handle on top, black. So the phone rang, and it was like it was like, wait a minute, I'm in the middle of a dream, and the phone's ringing. Because back then, like when the phone rang, you usually would answer it, not like now. And
Mm-hmm.
like the phone would often interrupt your day, because it'd be like, oh, who's calling me now? Like I'll be in the shower and the phone's ringing. How to get out of the shower and try to answer the phone. So that's what it's like in the dream. I'm in the middle of a dream. I was following this other person through the room that turned out to be about some other subject totally, and the phone rings. I said, who's calling me in a dream? I didn't know that people could, just interrupt your dreams with phone calls. Like, what is this? So I pick up the phone, and this dream operator was on the phone, and she said she had a person-to-person call for Robert Place from England, and would I accept it? So I said, sure. I mean, I doubt I'm going to get charges in the dream. So the thing is, so she put this woman on who was the secretary for a dream law firm, and she said I had an inheritance coming from England, from an ancestor in England, and I said, wow, that's great. And she said, well, if you accept it, like your ancestor misused it. It's very powerful, and your ancestor misused it, and so there's certain karmic debt connected to it, and you have to take on the karmic debt, but you'll get the gift, and and it's very powerful. So that sounded pretty good. So I said yes. And then I said, but how do I know it? And she says, oh, you'll know it when you see it. It's called the key, and it comes from England. So when I mean, it was so vivid. I woke up in the morning looking at the foot of the bed, expecting the box to be there. So in fact, my wife was saying, why are you looking at the foot of the bed? And so I told her about the dream and how I was going to get this inheritance. So within a couple of days, my friend Scott came over, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, and the door to the kitchen was to my left, and Scott's a real good friend. He just walked right in, and he's walking and holding the Wade Smith deck, which of course I remember from college, right? So, but the weird thing was my head turned to look at it's like not to look at him, but to look at the deck, and my eyes focused on the deck, like totally involuntarily, like, and then when I looked at it, I said, oh, of course that's it, because the trumps are called keys, and the book was The Key to the Tarot, and of course it was originally made in England, right? So I said, oh yeah, that's what the dream was talking about. So I told Scott about the dream. We started looking through the deck, and I said, well, gee, I'll have to get one of these, right? So because the dream, obviously, like it was like my dream makers were, which is Hermes, was telling me that this is a way to, my main form of divination was dream work. So they were telling me this is a way to keep your divination going, to create waking dreams, like you use the cards to create waking dreams. So within another day or so, another friend of mine who is an astrologer, Ed, he came by and he had a Tarot of Marseille, and he says, I have this feeling that I'm supposed to give you this Tarot of Marseille because I don't use it and you should have it. Like, I'm just got this message in my mind that you need this. So that was my first deck. Other than the 4 cards I made myself, and so I started playing around with that. But I said, but I should get the Wade Smith deck also, because that's really what the dream was about. So then, but back then I was living in New Jersey, and the western side of New Jersey, and there was no place to go buy a deck, so I had to drive into New York City. And I went into Times Square in a bookstore, and I saw they had tarot decks behind the counter. So I said, oh, I like a tarot, and of course the guy behind the counter said, you mean the tarot? Like you're saying it wrong. You don't know what you're doing. But here, look, these are the decks. You can have one of these. Oh, okay, I'll buy that. So I went home and I started looking at the deck, and then I said, well, maybe I should find out something about it. So I found some books on the tarot and started reading them. And being I was always I was an art historian and an artist, and none of the books made any sense because they were saying things that couldn't possibly be true, like that the tarot cards came from Egypt, and like it was nonsense, there was no historic basis to it. So I started looking for books, because I'm looking at the deck and seeing all this esoteric symbolism in it that's meaningful to me, and seeing how I could see from the Marseille deck how Pam McCollum-Smith had based a lot of her cards on the Marseille deck, and then I started trying to research, well, where does this other imagery come from on the pips, and I was, trying to put pieces together. So I looked for some real history, and I found Gertrude Moakley's book. She was one of the first real historians of the tarot in the 20th century, and she's a librarian at the New York Public Library, and she wanted to show how to do a research project. So she decided that it would be fun to do it on the tarot cards, right? So she wrote this whole book about the tarot cards and how they were based on these, because she found out they're originally called Carte da Trionfi, which means the card of the triumph, which is a parade, and so they were based on this parade in the Renaissance, and started piecing it together from that. And they said, well, that was some real insight, because we could narrow down that they were developed in the 1400s in northern Italy. We had some real facts. And we could look at we looked at old decks, and then you could actually go to New York City and do the research. Like I went to the J.P. Morgan Library, and I talked to the curator, and he brought some of the Visconti Sforza cards, which are some of the oldest in the world. And then I went to the Metropolitan Museum, and they showed me their collection, which had some of the oldest woodcut cards in the world. And so New York City was a great place to be researching the tarot, because you think you'd be better off in Europe, but no, it was pretty good in New York City. And So also I went to the New York Public Library, and I looked through their, what they had in their collection. It was really interesting because all the decks had these little notes written by Gertrude Moakley in pencil, and these little papers shoved in. And I was following Gertrude Moakley around, Then I read Michael Dummett's book, and then Michael Dummett, came out with some other histories, and then I found out about Kaplan's encyclopedia. So I got the Encyclopedia of the Tarot, and I started researching as much as I can, finding real history. And then the next thing I know, the weird thing was, I think it was in 1982, I was looking through some books on magic and alchemy, and the thing is, in alchemy, there's the key work of alchemy, the great work, or the magnum opus, is to create the Philosopher's Stone. Right now, the thing is, they say it's a stone that's not a stone. It's it's this catalyst that can turn anything into its higher self. So the thing is, most people think, okay, well, they want to make the Philosopher's Stone to turn lead into gold. But the reason they thought they could turn lead into gold is they thought all metals were one thing, and that gold was just the most impure, and that all metals wanted to become gold because gold was the best metal. It's like the most pure. Like, and all flowers wanted to be roses, and and all people wanted to be enlightened, and but also the thing is the philosophy was an elixir of life, and it could prolong life indefinitely, and it could heal any illness. So I mean, there had a lot of good qualities about it, but the thing is, it was immaterial. It was a stone that's not a stone. So how do you make a picture of, when there's a book and it had a picture of the philosopher's stone, but the stone you can't picture because you can't see it. So the way they do it is they make these mandala-like diagrams that symbolize the stone. So this mandala had a heart in the center, and around the heart was like a wreath of thorns, sort of like the crown of thorns, almost like the Sacred Heart symbolism in Catholicism. But there was a rose coming out of the heart, and it was in the center of a cross. But the background of the cross was divided. Each corner had one of the four elements. So I'm looking at this picture back in 1982, and this is around the time of the harmonic convergence, and I thought, oh, the harmonic convergence is just another New Age gimmick thing that they have going on, like what is that, so but then somebody said, that during the harmonic convergence, those people who are really sensitive to this esoteric information will be experiencing a flood of information coming to them. And I was definitely experiencing this because I was filling up notebooks. I had never been a writer before, and here I'm writing and like filling up notebooks and making diagrams of how things go together and studying the tarot and reading all these books. And I was supposed to be working as a jeweler, and I hardly spending any time making my jewelry anymore. I'm just like, my jewelry studio is getting filled with books going up to the ceiling, So I mean, I think people are starting to get worried about me. So I'm looking at this picture, and I'm thinking like, well, the heart is a symbol of the soul. And in Egyptian hieroglyphs, a dancing figure like the figure on the world card is a symbol of the soul. So the woman on the world card is sort of like the heart in this picture. And the four evangelists in the corners of the world card are just like the four elements here. In fact, in medieval symbolism, the four evangelist symbols were associated with the four fixed signs of the zodiac, which is each assigned to a different element. So they obviously connected symbolically to the four elements in the four corners. And then the soul's in the center. And I was thinking, so if the goal of alchemy was to create this philosopher's stone, and this is a picture of the philosopher's stone, and it coincides symbolically with the world card in the tarot, and that's the last of the trump cards. So then could the trump cards be, outlining the magnum opus because they end at the same image or a related symbolic image? Now, when I thought that, it was like it opened up this portal in the back of my mind, and I saw this flood of alchemical images that I had been looking at and how they all coincided with tarot cards. And I had, Jung's Psychology and Alchemy there. So I went through the book and I'm writing notes next to all the alchemical images about what tarot cards they relate to. So this all happened in just minutes. It was like a flood of information. It was like just an epiphany. And so then, I started working on once in a while I write about this and try, I go up to people and try to tell them what I would realize. I said, why did you realize the tarot could be like, alchemical great work? And, and of course people would say to me, well, why don't you write this down instead of just accosting people with the information?
Mhm.
So I said, well, I'm an artist. I'm not really a writer. And they said, well, you could just write it. Then you become a writer. So I said, okay. And then my friend Kathy said, well, you're an artist. Why aren't you just creating this deck that shows that it's like, like that tarot and alchemy is the same thing? I mean, that's why are you an artist? Like, do it. I said, well, gee, that's sort of, obvious. So, okay, I'll start doing that. So I was still making jewelry, and then in my spare time, I'm starting to draw these tarot cards. And so the first one I drew was the star with the mermaid giving out blood and milk. She's the siren of philosophers. And then I did the devil card, and I did temperance, and temperance based on Maria Professora, who was the creator of distillation, the Bon Marie, and okay, so I'm working along on it, and then I was in a health food store in New York City, and I'm at the checkout counter, and this magazine called Gnosis is there, which, as a Gnostic yourself, you'll probably appreciate this. So, so I was like, I've been studying about Gnostics, and most people didn't even know what Gnostics were, and here I was like, what? They have their own magazine? What is this? I'm just finding out about Gnostics, and they already have their own magazine. Like, why didn't I know this? So, my friend Sue was with me, and she said, well, aren't you going to buy the magazine? Come on, that's your field. I said, yeah, that's right. Okay, so I bought my friends keep pushing me in the right direction. So I bought the magazine, I brought it home, and I read it cover to cover. I said, what is this great magazine? Wow, this is really cool. I'll get a subscription to this. And then I heard this voice in the back of my mind. I was reading the Gnosis magazine one day, which I have since identified as Hermes. Basically, I always used to hear voices when I was young, but I didn't know who they were. But then by this time, I started realizing Hermes talks to me. So he said, send write to the editor of Gnosis magazine and send them the picture of your star card, because they're going to do an episode. They're going to do an issue on the tarot, and this way, you'll be ready for it. So I wrote this whole letter about I'm doing this tarot based on alchemy and how I like, I'm sending to them for their future issue on the tarot. So I got a phone call from San Francisco with the editor in chief at Gnosis calls me, Jay Kenny, and he says, "We're not doing an issue on the tarot. Why do you think that?" He says, but we're doing this issue on Sophia, on the goddess, and we're doing this article on Sophia, and this is a perfect illustration to go with the article, and I'm going to put it in the magazine, and I want you to write a one-page article explaining what the symbolism of this card. So I realized that, you see, what happened is Hermes lied to me, because if he told me that, I wouldn't have believed him. So he told me what seemed like a more obvious thing, that we're going to do an issue on the tarot, which then I did believe, and then I sent it in at the right time, and it came exactly at the right time when they're looking for an illustration. Okay, so I wrote the one-page article. It's the first thing I ever had published. This is in, I don't know, the late 1980s. And so Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who was a New Age author who'd written, maybe 10 books or so, on different subjects. She saw the article, and then she got in touch with me because she was doing a book called The Mystical Tarot, and she wanted me to write something for her book and put in some more of my cards. So now I put in the Devil and the Temperance card, and I wrote a few pages on it. So now I have a second thing published, and I had more of my images published, right? And I'm continuing to work on the tarot. So eventually, Rosemary, she realized I knew a lot more about alchemy than her. So she hired me as a ghostwriter to write, she was writing a book on alchemy and other subjects, and I wrote the chapter on alchemy. And then one day she calls me and she said, well, how's the tarot coming? And I said, well, I'm working on my jewelry mostly. And it's like, I have to just do some of my spare time. And she said, well, you really should get a contract from a publisher, and they'll give you an advance, and then the money will free up your time so you can work full time on the tarot. And then she said, look, I'll work with you. I could work on the book with you, because we should have a deck in the book. And, this way we could, get a good contract and a good advance. And I have some contacts in England. And so let's put together a proposal. So she showed me how to put together the proposal. I gave her the information I want. She helped me structure it, and we sent it off to Thorson's. Then, we sent it off to Thorson's, and then I get a call from the editor-in-chief at Thorson's, from England. And I said, I got a person, like, it wasn't a person-to-person call, but it was a call came in from England, just sort of like the dream, And she said that they wanted to publish. This looks great. We want to publish it. And they sent me a contract, and I worked out the contract, and they gave me a year to work on it. So at that time, I was drawing it in pen and ink, and then I to color it, I was trying to figure out how to color it, because I was going to color in gouache, but I had all this cross hatching in the pen and ink, and I didn't want the gouache to go over the cross hatching, so I wanted the coloring to be under the lines. so the funny thing is, I had a dream which told me that like in the dream, I saw like somehow in the future I was going to have these drawings on transparent film. Now, at that time, I knew this fellow Alan McKnight, who was a commercial artist here. You know, I had moved from New Jersey by then, and I was living up in New York in Saugerties, which was right next to Woodstock. So Alan McKnight was working in Woodstock, and I, you know, was working on some other projects with him. And he told me, well, what you have to do is you get film positives made, which was exactly what the dream showed me. You know, so so then I went down to Kingston, and I had their photographer would photograph my drawings, and then he basically a film positive is the opposite of a negative. You know, like you make basically make a negative of the negative, and you end up with a positive. So like what you have is a clear film with the black lines on it. So that's what I did with all the drawings, and then I put on a light box, and I put the paper on top, and I traced the main lines, and then I painted in the colors on the paper, but I kept putting now I could lay the lines over to make sure it all was in register. And so that's how I did the whole project. I did it that way, you know, because I wasn't working on the computer at all. And then Rosemary even gave me she gave me her old laptop computer with the writing, and then you know, basically I wrote the book, but she helped me. You know, I never wrote a book before, so she helped me form the book and show me what needed to be in a book. And see, that's why they gave me the contract too, because they knew Rosemary. You know, they said, "Are we going to take it? This guy's a great artist, but the thing is, he never wrote a book. But Rosemary's written lots of books, so like we trust this partnership." And so you know, and they gave me good advance, and we were able to do it. So it got published, and then when it got published, it became like it made a stir all around, because you know, because I had put all this real history into it, and explaining that I don't believe that the tarot cards are intended to be an alchemical text. But the thing is that what I see is that the tarot cards were developed in Renaissance Italy in the early 1400s, when there was a resurgence of interest in Hermeticism, which is part of what the Renaissance is, right? This resurgence of interest in you know, Hermetic philosophy, which of course did come from Alexandria in Egypt. So that's why I think the later occultists thought that tarot came from Egypt, but you know, because the philosophy comes from Egypt. But it came from Renaissance, you know, culture. In fact, you know, like everybody's making up stories about who created the tarot, but the secret is artists in the Renaissance. In Renaissance Italy, artists created the tarot, and artists artists were very sophisticated philosophically in Renaissance Italy. So they created this wonderful philosophical structure. So I wrote the book explaining that is, and the thing is that alchemy is part of Hermeticism, and so that's why it coincides so well with the tarot, because tarot is Hermetic. And you know, and so credit story. So I mean, I got interviewed on radio shows, sort of like this podcast and stuff, and I explained it, and then sometimes people would start yelling at me and say that you know, they didn't like what I was saying, because I was upsetting all, you know, that the tarot was really came from ancient Egypt, you know, like. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, this one woman was interviewing me in New York, and she said that, don't you realize the tarot came from Egypt, and Egyptians were black Africans, and you know, and the tarot is created by black people, and like, you know, so obviously you must be a racist, you know. So I said, well, no, I'm just a historian. I'm basing what I'm saying on facts. That's all. So I don't really care what color the people were, but the thing is. Also, then there's this whole thing about the Kabbalah, you know, and like, oh, well, obviously it was created by Jews, but it was, you know, the thing is, it wasn't created by Jews. The thing, you know, the cultists much later associate the Kabbalah with the tarot, because the Kabbalah is based on Hermeticism. So the whole secret is that it's Renaissance Hermeticism, and that's what I've been writing about ever since, and trying to research more thoroughly, and how I lecture at the Metropolitan Museum, and then I was invited to the Tarot Museum in Riola, Italy, where I cut the ribbon on the grand opening of the and had an exhibition of my drawings of the alchemical tarot, and then I was able to I put together a whole show on the tarot and the origins of tarot for the Craft and Folk Art Museum in Los Angeles, you know, and mostly by this time, more, you know, people have come to realize that history is real, you know, and you can't just make stuff up, you know. So only once in a while they run into people's going, what, this? How come you're saying all this stuff, you know? But the thing is, mostly people now, they they want to be real too. They just realize that there is a real history, and like and I'm not one of these people that, like Michael Dummett, who was a historian. He acts, he talks about the history of cards, and he acts like there's very little mysticism to it. He doesn't want to discuss that part. See, whereas I'm not like that, because I think the history verifies that there is a mystical symbolism in the cards. So, I'm helping people to see, okay, well, if we go with real history, there's not a break between they think the tarot is mystical and finding real history. The real history verifies that the tarot is mystical. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, no. So you really see it as a story of the Philosopher's Stone, really, or do you think it's like so archetypal that, I mean, you could probably see a lot of things in it?
Oh yeah,
Maybe you
people
see.
do. Well, that's how I did the Buddha tarot, because I saw how, if you looked at the iconography and the story of Siddhartha and how he became enlightened, that there's all the icons, you could relate them to the tarot cards, right? Because basically the Hermeticism is based on the idea. It's based on the Hermetic text, which came from Alexandria. They're written by all different people. But the thing is, they all signed the Hermes Trismegistus. So it's weird, when we think about all these different authors, like using the same pseudonym, and signing with this, they presented Hermes Trismegistus like he was this ancient sage who lived before Moses, and and became enlightened, and by becoming he reached gnosis, and therefore became a god, like a god. Because they were polytheists, so Hercules, the great hero, became a god, right? So people could become gods, and which is just another name for a bodhisattva or enlightened, or in the context of the culture. Which, see, people get upset because once if you're a monotheist, you say, well, there's only one God. How can you all say you're gods? But then they have saints, and and that's just playing with the vocabulary. Because all they're saying, because in the ancient world, when they're saying people became gods, they were sort of like saying they became saints, or they became bodhisattvas, or what they mean is people become enlightened, and I find this trend in all different religions. I've studied world religions, that besides all the the part of religions that's about controlling people and creating power and solidifying their power by how you control people. There's this other core that the religion seems to be based around, which is actual mystical experiences. And the mystical experiences go beyond the religion, and each religion tries to, they form their own vocabulary about how to explain the mystical experience. But the way I see it, all the mystical experiences are similar in that the person who becomes enlightened experiences oneness with the universe, and feels like they're one with all life and reality. And therefore, if you feel like you're one with life and reality, it's hard for you to be a bad person because you're hurting yourself. That's like the story of St. Francis, right? So we call him a saint. But see, like, it's interesting because in India, they consider him an avatar.
Yeah. And, along the same lines, like you had mentioned, the four evangelists are like the four quarters of the earth.
Yeah.
Did you say? And
see, the thing is, there's the world card is called a quincunx. It's a certain type of a mandala where you have four images in the four corners that represent the physical world, the fourfold world. So the fourfold world in alchemical reasoning has four directions, four seasons, four elements. Sometimes the characters in the corners will be the four winds. Sometimes they'll be the four evangelists, or which then are connected to the four fixed signs of the zodiac, which represent the wheel of the year. Or you can actually just show pictures of the four elements in the four corners. But then what's in the middle is called the quinta essentia, the essential fifth. And that's the spirit or the soul that enters into the physical world. Like to the alchemist, the physical world can't exist without a soul, because the soul is what makes it move. And as anything that moves has soul, like, in Latin, soul is anima. So when you say something's animated, you're really saying it's animated. In other words, it's ensouled, because to be ensouled is to be able to move. And the alchemists believe that the whole world's alive, whereas modern science is based on that there's such a thing as dead matter, and that somehow life comes out of dead matter. But the latest the latest discoveries of physicists show that everything's moving all the time. Like every atom is full of particles moving; they're all self-moving. So by the alchemical terminology and reasoning, they're all alive because they all are animated. So, or like you say, you call an animal, you say that's an animal, and then some people say, well, the animals have souls. Well, you're literally saying they have a soul if you call them an animal, because you're saying they're an animal, an ensouled creature. See, I mean, that's literally what the name of animal means. What the word animal means. So, so the world card, it shows, it's called the world, but really it's what it's depicting is the anima mundi, or the soul of the world. So like it says world, but then the picture says anima.
Gotcha. And so, just like you could take it in like a Buddhist direction or alchemical, you've not yet taken it like in a Christian direction, or am I off there?
The saints.
Got it. All right. And like when we talk about like the four elements, do you associate each of the evangelists with a particular element?
Yeah, well, and as the symbols of the evangelists are connected to the bull is Taurus, the lion's Leo, the eagle is another symbol for Scorpio, and then the angel represents Aquarius, and so each of them are in astrology they're all related to different elements. I mean, that's just basic astrology.
Gotcha. And maybe like a random question: have you looked into Mithraism at all?
Oh yeah, well, because in Mithraism, there's all this symbolism which seems to be relate to the seven metals. Like, see, the alchemists believe there were seven metals, from lead to gold. So and lead was the most impure, but as you purified it, it went up through the ladder of the metals. We have lead, iron, tin, copper, mercury, silver, and then gold, right? Okay. So now the seven metals are related to the seven planets of the ancients. Like to the ancients, there's always misinformation about like the people. Oh, people used to think the world was flat. Like the whole thing about how Columbus, discovered the world was round, and everybody told him he was going to sail off the end, and that never happened. That was actually it's so weird because Washington Irving, who was our first great author in the United States, right? He wrote this whole story about Columbus, and he made up that whole story about how everybody told him the world's flat and stuff, and it ended up in history books. But there wasn't, all the astronomers and since ancient world, they knew the world was round. If you look in the Middle Ages, if you look at illuminated manuscripts, you see they show the world is round. Everybody knew it was round. They were so sophisticated in the ancient world, they could see that in an eclipse that you were seeing the shadow of the Earth on the moon, right, or on the sun, and so you could see it's round. You could just see its shadow, so obviously you're going over a curve because that's what creates a horizon. Nobody thought the world was flat. So maybe in prehistoric times, but ever since there's been civilization, people knew the world was round. So, but what they didn't know is that the sun was in the center of the solar system. Now, and there's some Pythagoreans who theorized that and worked out ideas that there could be a central fire and that the planets went around the central fire. But if you look at the night sky, like every night I go and walk my dog and I look at the stars and the planets and stuff, and if you look at all the stars and the planets from your place on Earth, they all go in a circle east to west around the Earth. So they all look like they're going around the Earth. That's just, it's just obvious if you observe it. And it takes a whole lot of mathematical reasoning and stuff to figure out that's not true. So you know, and with the naked eye you can see 7 planets, but the 7 planets includes the sun and the moon. So it looks like the sun's going around the Earth. So the Earth's not a planet. See, in the ancient cosmos, the Earth is the center, and the sun and the moon go around the Earth along with you know, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. You know, so so what they in the ancient world they organized. Like they felt that the Earth was in the center of these crystal spheres around the Earth, like layers of an onion, and each one had a planet on it. And see the Pythagoreans, they basically felt that there was a you know, it was organized by the speed they went around the Earth. So the one that was closest to the Earth was the moon. So that's why we call the Earth the sublunar realm, because you know, it was just below the moon, right? And the sun was right in the middle, which obviously took a year to go around, where the moon only takes a month. And then Saturn was way up at the top because it takes 22 years to go around, and everybody else is in between somewhere. So so they felt there was this hierarchy, like Saturn was the highest one and the moon was the lowest one, and so they were like a ladder of the planets. So we see in the Hermetic material that these 7 planets are called the governors of the Earth, and I said they're each related to a god. So, and then beyond the planets are the fixed stars, you know, which and all the planets go through the zodiac, which is the ecliptic. So that's how it looks from planet Earth. Now, astrology is based on the idea that when you're reincarnated, that your soul goes through one of the doorways in the zodiac, and then comes down through the planets, and then the gods of each planet give it certain qualities. So that's why there's these lists of 7 vices and 7 virtues. They're each related to a planet. So in the ancient world, they had a type of meditation, like like the Greek mystics had it. The mystics in Alexandria, the Jewish mystics had the same type of meditation, where they picture themselves like they believed that when you died, you went up through the planets and back to heaven, and then you were reincarnated. So what they tried to do is, in a trance-like state, they picture themselves going up through the planets and letting go of the qualities of each planet until you know, got up to heaven and achieved the gnosis. You know, and like in Jewish mysticism, they related this to the chariot of Ezekiel. You know, who supposed you know, went up on the chariot of God. So so you see how, like in alchemy, when lead was becoming all these other metals, it was sort of like symbolic, like if you're making this transformation in your alchemical work, it's like doing that same meditation in a physical form, like the alchemist is identifying with the product of the work. And so he's seeing himself going through that and becoming more enlightened, because the idea, in other words, like people looked at the astrology chart, the qualities you had in the astrology chart, as these different, you know, the planets gave you all these different qualities. It's sort of a hindrance to enlightenment. So in other words, you had to, well, basically to become enlightened, you have to let go of your personality. So you go through the planets, let go of each aspect of your personality until you become clear, you know, like in your real self. You know, depending. I mean, you know, Gnostics tend to look at it negatively, like these were curses, you know, whereas Hermeticists didn't necessarily think they were curses. They just, you know, things that were in the way, you know. Like your personality is fine, you know, but it's time to let go. Mm-hmm. So and see, and Pythagoras felt that, we see this in the work of Pythagoras and Plato, that these planets also exist in soul centers within the body that go up the spine, which is, you know, identical to the modern ideas we see in New Age circles about the chakras. But here we can go all the way back to, you know, 600 BC, and when they're talking about Pythagoras and how he created the music of the spheres, which is the music that the planets made by the ratios, and how he created a harp, a kithara with 7 strings that captured the music of the spheres. And then people would come to him who were sick, and he'd look at their soul centers, and he attuned them to this harp, the lyre, and he'd heal them by bringing their soul centers into balance. See, so our whole culture is full. So Christianity absorbed all this. Like, we don't have any Pythagorean schools anymore. That he heavily influenced Plato, and Platonism was absorbed into Christianity. So that's why, you know, there's 7 virtues, 7 vices, 7 sacraments, you know, the sacred number 7 in Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm always surprised by how much in terms of Platonism exists in Christianity. Like we have Timaeus and Genesis, right? How there's a lot of overlap and a lot of Platonic ideas in Christianity.
Oh yeah,
Right?
definitely. Well, like a lot of the early Christian scholars were trying to, you know, Christianize Plato. In fact, see, the thing is, when the Corpus Hermeticum was brought to Italy in the 1400s, and basically the Corpus, and you know, it's brought by Greek scholars to Italy, and then they start translating into Latin, and you know, like Cosimo de' Medici invited all these scholars from Greece over to his villa, you know, to Florence, and he saw this material, and he, you know, like this what we call Neoplatonic philosophy, which of course they didn't call it that, they just called it Platonic philosophy. So see, his doctor Ficino had this really gifted son, Marsilio Ficino, and so Cosimo decided that he should, you know, guide his education and make sure that he became a scholar of languages, and then he gave him this villa outside town that was his villa, and he said, well, here, I want you to create a new academy, you know, which is the name of Plato's school, and of course the original school is just named after the field that it was in. You know, it was based on some mythology, but you know, now academies become synonymous with saying a school. So he created one of the first academies in Renaissance Italy, and he gave Ficino all this material to translate into Latin so that Western scholars could read it. So they got hold of the Corpus Hermeticum from Greece, and they brought it there, and he said, okay, stop translating Plato, start translating this, because they were taking it at face value because it said that it was older than Plato. So they felt that the Corpus Hermeticum was this mystical philosophy that influenced Plato and influenced Christianity, and, like, you know, influenced Judaism. Like, it was this base philosophy before all these things. But really, the Corpus Hermeticum was mostly written after Christ, the birth of Christ, you know, in the first couple hundred years. So my wife's just going, take care. Okay. So, you know, so they basically had this misconception, and then, in fact, you even see, like in Siena, like when they're showing all the founders of Christian philosophy, and then they and on in the mosaic on the floor, and they made a picture of Hermes Trismegistus, looking like this Middle Eastern sage, you know, who was, like, you know, before Moses and before Plato, which he really was, because first he wasn't a real person. Basically, see, the thing is, when you know, the Ptolemies basically became the rulers, you know, after Alexander the Great, his general Ptolemy took over Egypt. So the Ptolemies became the rulers of Egypt, and they were Greek. So the scholarly language in Egypt was Greek, and they were translating a lot of Egyptian texts, and when they talked about Thoth, I mean, it's weird because Thoth even is a Hellenized version of his name, you know, which is really Jehudi or something like that in Egyptian, and Thoth. But then they equated Thoth. They would equate Egyptian gods with Greek gods, which was really common in the ancient world. That they felt that the gods were all the same, just people had different names for them, which is actually more accurate than not. You know, it's sort of, you know, it's like Jung's theory of the archetypes, right? So. So they felt that Thoth was Hermes, but to show that they were talking about, see, Thoth would be like Thoth, the great god, like if they say it 3 times. So instead of saying great Hermes, they say Hermes Trismegistus, so that's thrice great, and that showed that it was Hermes Thoth. But of course, these, you know, both Hermes and Thoth are gods, you know, yet they were treating him like he was a scholar, like who lived in an ancient world long ago and became enlightened, became a god through achieving gnosis. So basically gnosis is just it's a word for knowledge, but it means a certain type of knowledge. So it's basically just another way of saying enlightened.
Yeah.
Or like how like in Christianity, when someone becomes a saint, they say he has a beatific vision. Which they can't say, oh, he became like God, or realizes that he's part of God, or they can't say it. So they say he has a face-to-face relationship with God, which is a beatific vision, because in their philosophy they can't admit it, what's going on. See, whereas in Buddhism, when somebody becomes enlightened, becomes a Buddha, they say he's more important than the gods. That the gods actually look up to Buddha. I think that's an essential difference between like Christianity and Buddhism. Otherwise, they're very similar. Because the bodhisattvas are like saints, and like and the way in a way, like if you go into like European, like in Italy and European countries that are heavily Catholic, and you see like they have like they'll have images of the saints in the stores, and they'll put flowers out by the saints, and to keep and it's like it's just magic rituals to keep prosperity coming to the store and stuff, and the same thing, you'll find that same thing in Eastern Asia, where there's like Buddhas in the stores and stuff, and they put incense and candy in front of the Buddhas, and got to keep the favor of the Buddhas, the bodhisattvas. I mean, I don't know how many. Yeah, I don't know how many Italian groceries I've seen where they have a Madonna in the corner.
Yeah. So, in terms of tarot, what's so you have the trumps, right? And how is it arranged, and what's your philosophy when you like do a tarot reading and whatnot? Like what's yeah.
Well, I believe that, see, the thing is, when they were creating the tarot cards in Renaissance Italy, like a lot of artists were influenced by the Hieroglyphica, which was another Greek book that supposedly told the secrets of hieroglyphs. Because see, in Western Europe, they were really enamored with hieroglyphs. In fact, there's more obelisks in Western Europe even today than there are in all of Egypt, and they're all covered with hieroglyphs, right? I mean, there's one right in front of the Vatican. And people really said, wow, like, that's why, see, they felt that Thoth, who invented hieroglyphs, according to the mythology, that the first book, he created hieroglyphs to make the first book, and his first book was like, had the secrets of the words of power. So it was like the most magical and powerful book that ever was created. So they felt like that the hieroglyphs must contain all this like secret knowledge and like be really powerful. So there's this great mysticism about Egypt, because Egypt was like one of the, it's like this really ancient culture compared to like Greece and Rome and all these others. I mean, Egypt, even though the Greeks took over Egypt, like there was thousands of years of history before them. Like they were the end of like 3,000 years of history. And there's all these, and all these huge stone monuments, and every surface covered with hieroglyphs. And most people didn't know how to read them, because only the priests or the scribes knew how to read them. And see, and of course Thoth was the scribe of the gods, so that's why he invented hieroglyphs, to keep track of things. So this book sort of made hieroglyphs like as if they were just open-ended. In other words, that they were symbolic images that contained all kinds of information in one image, and that it was really open-ended, which isn't, see, and this is a big hindrance. It took years for them to decipher hieroglyphs, because they kept thinking they were more open-ended and mystical than they were. And so really this book was just a Greek misinterpretation of hieroglyphs. So what happened is a lot of artists jumped on the bandwagon. They wanted to create hieroglyphs. They wanted to create mystical pictures that contained all kinds of information. This became a great trend in the Renaissance, and like we see like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, all these Botticelli, all the like their pictures are filled with symbolism. Everything in a Renaissance picture, Albert Dürer, all these people, like everything symbolizes something beyond itself. Like when I studied art in college back in the 1960s, abstract expression was the thing, and they were basically acting like, like the subject of the art didn't matter. What mattered was the form elements, like line, form, color, texture, like the form elements and how you compose them, and that's was the beauty of the painting, and that was the message, and that's all you needed. So you could just make abstract things like that, See, and now in the Renaissance, that would be considered the body of the picture. Like every artist was supposed to know how to compose those elements, but they also had to have a soul, and the soul was the message that came through, and that was created through the symbolism. So they would, so basically, like the abstract expressionist philosophy acted like, well, putting that literary message in there is just sort of dumb, because that's not what it's all about. It's just illustrative and dumb. Whereas in the Renaissance, they basically would have felt that abstract expressionists were a bunch of dullards and didn't have soul. So all the artists wanted to create these soulful images, like where we see that, where they put things together. Now, and there were these parades they had called triumphi, like Gertrude Moakley talked about. And in the parades, they had them more than once. Like Italy wasn't a country; it was all these different city-states, and each city-state was, like its own country, basically. And each so there were parades. Every single city-state could have many parades during the year, and these parades were organized. A triumph was organized so that the most important character was the last one. So from the least important to the most important, each one trumped the one that came before. That's where the word trump comes from the triumphi. So the triumphi meant the first cart or horses or whatever came, would be trumped by the next one and the next one and the next one. So you got to the most important thing. So this is a way of organizing a philosophical statement about what was, putting things in a hierarchy of what's most important. So, of course, the last triumph in the parade was the most mystical, the most important, like the most everlasting. And great, Leonardo da Vinci worked on triumphi in Milan. He helped organize them. Created his records where he created this, this moving vehicle that was a model of the cosmos with spheres going around spheres, and there was little boys acting like angels singing on it, and So some of the greatest artists. See, like there wasn't any separation between high art and low art. So the thing is, great artists could work on parades. There's records where Michelangelo was asked by the Pope to gild the ornaments on the end of his bedposts. Like it wasn't like it wasn't like great artists were so exalted. They're just artists. Like so, they're just like the best craftsmen, you might say. And so anyway, so these parades were mystical in the first place, and then the metaphor of the parade started being used by artists like Petrarch, who wrote this poem E Triumphi, where he used it to show philosophical ideas and what's more important. So that's basically what the tarot cards were in the first place. It was this hierarchy. The trumps are the parade, which is the hierarchy of images from the least important to the most important, which is the world card. So that's why it works just like the alchemical great work.
Yeah, where it's like you have the spheres, right? And you're ascending through the spheres, just like each god had a domain. Each trump kind of has a domain.
Yeah, right. So you could definitely relate the planets to trump cards if you want. Then they weren't necessarily. See, the thing is, they weren't necessarily hidden images of a lot of occultists now act like, oh, well, they were afraid of being burned at the stake, so they had to disguise up, these astrological images or planets in the cards, and that was bull. There were there were popes practicing astrology. Ficino was a priest and he practiced astrology. So it wasn't like and then there was a deck like in Florence, where it was one of the first places to create the tarot. By the 1500s, they created a deck called they basically didn't call it a tarot there. They called it a minchiati, which means like a foolish thing, led by the fool. And they had regular 78 card decks, but then they started with 21 trumps and a fool, right? But then they started adding to it, and so by the 1500s they ended up with 20 trumps. I mean 40 trumps. and a fool. So by adding to it, they added all the signs of the zodiac. They added the 4 elements. You know, I mean, they just put them in there. It wasn't like a big secret. They put pictures of the, you know, like everybody knew the astrological symbols. You didn't have to hide them. You know, but really the weird thing about the Minchiati is that it ends like all the astrological signs are together near the end, just before, you know, the sun and the moon, and then, you know, judgment. And they're not in any astrological order. They always end with Gemini. In fact, sometimes the deck was called the Gemini. And when I you know, I was in Italy and I'm asking people, how come this isn't in any known order? And the best answer I got is like, because you were it forced you to memorize it for the game. So they took them out of order, forcing you to memorize them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is a game related to it, isn't there?
Yeah, these were used for playing card games.
Yeah.
Okay, but we also have evidence that it was used for divination. But the thing is, all cards could be used for divination, and regular 4-suit cards, like playing cards, were more popular for divination than the tarot originally.
Why do you think that was?
Well, they're more available. The tarot, see, first of all, the tarot is more expensive. You have all these picture cards, like, you know, a lot of the decks we have are made for nobles and hand painted, and, you know, where just regular playing cards like were more available to everybody.
Yeah.
Also,
and
the regular playing cards look like the minor suits in the tarot, because the suits of the regular playing cards were, you know, swords and staves and cups and coins, which was based on the Islamic pattern called the Mamluk deck, which is how the cards were introduced. You know, the 4-suit deck was originally introduced in Spain and in Sicily by Islamic peoples, and it was called the Mamluk deck. And the suits were coins and cups, scimitars, and polo sticks. And they had 10 tips and 3 royal cards. And so the first Spanish and Italian decks imitated that, and so they made that the suit symbols. And of course, the tarot took those 4-suit decks and then added the trumps to it, and that happened in the 1400s. So the deck was introduced in the 1300s, but by the 1400s they added trump cards to it. You know, but they're still using 4-suit decks too. I mean, it gets really complicated. You have to read my whole book, you know.
Yeah.
The book like really it looks like thick. It weighs 3.5 pounds. You know, like it's like there's so much stuff in there.
Yeah. And which book is that has the history?
Wait. Okay, I'm back. Can you see it?
It's a little tricky to see. There we go. The Tarot,
Magic
Alchemy, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonism. Yeah.
3rd edition. So guys, the further back I get, the better. Actually. Okay. See, it's half. You can look at it. You could use this as a doorstop if you don't want to read it.
Yep. Very good. Yeah, it's interesting how it all kind of connects together, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And do you see a difference between tarot and divination, or they kind of blend together?
Well, it works. Like I said, you know, my dream told me to use the cards for divination from the beginning. So the way now realizing that they were Renaissance hieroglyphs and that hieroglyphs are supposed to go together to make sentences, from the beginning, I wouldn't, like a lot of people use the tarot cards and they'll just put out one card and it has meaning to them. I don't do that. I put out 3 cards together and read them as one message. And then if in a more complicated reading, I would use 3 cards for each place in the reading. So, you know, because I'm allowing the images to go together to talk. And how I read them, so I look at the direction of the cards and look how the characters are interacting with each other. In fact, I just did this whole workshop at Omega Institute with this, and this I think this is the hardest thing for people to get straight, like looking at the direction of the figures. But it's natural to me because I'm an artist, so I'm just looking at it as a painting. And I never use upside down cards because that's like, you know, turning the painting upside down. Besides, the thing is, see, you know, like Attila, who obviously had reverse meanings for his cards, right? He put out one card that has a meaning, right? And the meaning's written right on the card, right? Which is actually how, like, the oldest decks we know that were used for divination, they find the same thing. The meanings are written right on the cards. You know, it wasn't like there's some book you go to or something. They just wrote the meaning on the card. So so he has a meaning at the top, and then he has another one at the bottom upside down. So in case it's reversed, right? Okay, so now the thing is, because you only have 78 cards in a regular tarot deck, and so now you've got 78 possible things you could say. Now, if you turn it upside down, it gives you, like, you know, 156, right? So
Mhm.
right, yeah. So yeah, okay. So now I've calculated that if you put how many different ways 3 cards can go together in this 456,456 combinations of 3 cards. So you have this huge vocabulary. You know, it's sort of like DNA. You know, like there's only 4 letters in DNA, yet it describes all life because of all the different combinations, right? So I don't need upside down cards to give me more information because the way they go together gives me the information. And I find it very that's very successful. And like,
Mhm.
I know when I do the workshops, people seem to like it, and it works for them. Like I tell people, look, this is the way I do it. It's worked. I worked out for me. It's what works for me. And if you want to learn from me, you should just copy what I do. And if it doesn't, and then you find out it's not working right, or you want to tweak it, you know, just do what you do and find out what works for you. But you know, it's not like I have the final word. That's just what I do.
Yeah. And do you find that it's you look at all these symbols and you might be taking the wrong message away from it? That you might be misreading how it's like you might have other people that would take it different ways, let's say.
Well, it's interesting because with the students, sometimes, like, I'm seeing what they're doing, and they're not really following the direction. And I have them read for each other, and then I'll come over and say, well, no, look, this is doing this, and he's turning his back to this guy, and he's going there, and we're reading. The person we're reading for go, oh yeah, that's right, you know, like it clicks. So I know it's working, and when I start getting them to start paying attention to how the thing's talking to them, then it works. But see, another aspect of getting the cards to talk to you is to understand the imagery where it comes from. You know, that imagery has a history. And that's basically what I want my students to become, like, friends with the tarot. So like when, you know, you meet somebody new and you're trying to become friends, like, you know, you talk about your past. You know, where did you live? Oh, how long have you been living here? You know, what were your parents like? You know, so, like, you know, you find out more about somebody, you understand them better. So the same thing with the tarot cards. If you find out where they really came from, and what the imagery means, and where the imagery came from, and, you know, and it starts talking to you more. It becomes old friends, and you want those images to talk to you, and then it's just a matter of seeing how they're relating to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let's see. Do you see yourself as like making innovations in tarot, or do you see yourself as like how do you?
I did at first because everybody was giving me a hard time. So, like, I always just making innovation, but it's not so much now. I see other people teaching my technique, and they don't even mention me. You know, and everybody's become more familiar. More and more authors are familiar with the tarot. Like, you pick up most tarot books now, and they have accurate history in them. You know, they realize that, you know, that other stuff was fake. You know, fake news. You know, like, people are getting fed up with fake news.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the occult world was full of fake news long before Trump came around.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we've explored everything. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you think we ought to?
I'm sure there is, but I'm getting my throat's getting dry.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so maybe we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you can think of
And
anything else, we can
yeah,
do it again. You know,
how's that?
if you think of any other questions that I didn't answer, we could do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting and fun. So yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, and thank you everybody for watching. And yeah, have a great rest of the day here.
All right. Take care.
Yep. Bye.